Hello, this is Adam from American Teacher on YouTube. If you haven't, please click subscribe and give me a thumbs up and leave a message in the comment section. Okay, for today's topic, I saw an article that had something to do with my talk about technology in the future. And so I'm going to mention that for a short time until I move into my next topic, which is the main topic of today. So this I saw at npr.org is dated July 14th, 2021, written by John Hamilton. It says, experimental brain implant lets man with paralysis turn his thoughts into words. A man who is unable to move or speak can now generate words or thoughts, words and sentences on a computer using only his thoughts. The ability comes from an experimental implanted device that decodes signals in the man's brain that once controlled his vocal tract, as researchers reported Wednesday in the New England Journal of Medicine. The man is currently limited to a vocabulary of just 50 words and communicates at a rate of about 15 words per minute, which is much slower than natural speech. Quote, this tells us that it's possible, says Edward Chang, a neurosurgeon at the University of California, San Francisco. Quote, I think there's a huge runway to make this better over time. A device that allowed people who can't speak to communicate using brain circuits previously used for speech would, quote, be, quote, more natural and hopefully effortless compared to current assistive devices, end quote, said Shathan Pandaranath, an assistant professor in the Department of Biomedical Engineering at Emory University and Georgia Tech. So currently, the article goes on to say that currently people have to use, people who have paralysis have to use devices that track their head or eye movements in order to spell out words one letter at a time, which is painstaking. And this neurosurgeon, Dr. Chang, wanted to find a better solution. So this man, codenamed Bravo 1, because they want to protect his identity, was paralyzed by a stroke 15 years ago. And the stroke left him nearly completely paralyzed in the arms and legs, but also in the muscles of his vocal tract, Chang says. So the areas of the brain that once controlled his speech were still intact, but he hadn't used them for 15 years. So basically, the doctors had to train him to use this part of his brain, the part that controls speech, after he hadn't used it in 15 years. So this is exciting. Brain implants could one day allow us to communicate without speaking, and that would be wonderful for people who have paralysis. So technology is continuing to advance. Okay, now for the main topic of today, and I hate to say it, this is kind of a doom porn topic. Talking about a couple of whammies that are coming our way in the near future that might be sink or swim moments for humanity. And the first one is an article that I saw last night from NASA. This was published in USA Today. The title of the article is Brace for Flooding. A moon wobble is coming, NASA warns. So the author is Jordan Mendoza, and the article is dated July 15th, 2021. It says, thanks to a wobble in the moon's orbit and rising sea levels, every coast in the U.S. will face rapidly increasing high tides that will start a decade of dramatic increases in flood numbers in the 2030s. So next decade, in other words. The conclusion, which was published in the Nature Climate Change Journal by NASA Sea Level Change science team from the University of Hawaii, has to do with the moon's orbit, which takes 18.6 years to complete, according to NASA. For half of that time period, Earth's regularly daily tides are suppressed, with high tides at a low average and low tides happening at a higher rate. In the other half of the cycle, the opposite occurs. Quote, high tides get higher, low tides get lower. Global sea level rise pushes high tides in only one direction, higher. So half of the 18.6 year lunar cycle counteracts the effect of sea level rise on high tides, and the other half increases the effect. So in the next decade, this effect is going to increase, and the tides will be higher. And of course, this is a cycle, so it's happened before, but scientists are saying that this time the flooding will be much worse due to the rising sea levels caused by global warming. So that's the first one, and that's not the most concerning article. The next article in Vice magazine, Motherboard, is written by Nafiz Ahmed, dated July 14th, 2021. The title is MIT predicted in 1972 that society will collapse this century. Research shows that we are on schedule. So according to this Vice News article, a remarkable new study by a director at one of the largest accounting firms in the world has found that a famous decades-old warning from MIT about the risk of industrial civilization collapsing appears to be accurate based on new empirical data. As the world looks forward to a rebound in economic growth following the devastation wrought by the pandemic, the research raises urgent questions about the risks of attempting to simply return to the pre-pandemic normal. In 1972, a team of MIT scientists got together to study the risks of civilizational collapse. Their system dynamics model, published by the Club of Rome, identified impending limits to growth, or LTG, that meant industrial civilization was on track to collapse sometime within the 21st century due to overexploitation of planetary resources. The controversial MIT analysis generated heated debate and was widely derided at the time by pundits who misinterpreted its findings and methods. But the analysis has now received stunning vindication from a study written by a senior director at professional services giant KPMG, one of the, quote, Big Four accounting firms, as measured by global revenue. So the study was published in the Yale Journal of Industrial Ecology in November 2020 and is available on the KPMG website. It concludes that the current business as usual trajectory of global civilization is heading toward the terminal decline of economic growth within the coming decade, and at worst could trigger societal collapse by around 2040. So the decade after record floods caused by the moon cycle and global warming. So the study itself, according to the article, is not affiliated or conducted on behalf of KPMG and does not necessarily reflect the views of KPMG. So this the author of the study, Gaia Harrington, performed the research as an extension of her master's thesis at Harvard University in her capacity as advisor to the Club of Rome. So, according to the author, quote, given the unappealing prospect of collapse, I was curious to see which scenarios were aligning most closely with the empirical data today. After all, the book that featured this world model was a bestseller in the 1970s, and by now we'd have several decades of empirical data which would make a comparison meaningful. But to my surprise, I could not find recent attempts for this. So I decided to do it myself." End quote. So Harrington's analysis, it goes on to say, examines data across 10 key variables, namely population, fertility rates, mortality rates, industrial output, food production, services, renewable resources, persistent pollution, human welfare, and ecological footprint. She found that the latest data most closely aligns with two particular scenarios named BAU2, or business as usual, and CT, comprehensive technology. So BAU2 and CT scenarios both show a halt in growth within a decade or so from now. Both scenarios thus indicate that continuing business as usual, that is, pursuing continuous growth, is not possible. Even when paired with unprecedented technological development and adoption, business as usual, as modeled by LTG, would inevitably lead to declines in industrial capital, agricultural output, and welfare levels within this century. So the author of the article points out that that economic collapse does not mean humanity will cease to exist, but rather that economic and industrial growth as we know it will stop and then decline, which will hurt our food production and standards of living. So this is sobering news, that within the next couple of decades we could see a decline in economic growth, and that is concerning because the business as usual model, the world grows currently from economic growth. The world is sustained through economic growth, and if this economic growth were to actually decline, we would go through a winnowing process. And whenever resources become scarce, the tendency for humans to have conflict increases. And we're already seeing this. I'm not saying that the current global problems are totally due to, and all the rioting currently going on worldwide is due to only resource shrinkage. That's not the only cause, but as resources become more scarce, then people are more likely to be violent, and that is just multiple sociological and anthropological studies have shown this. So of course the resource shortage would tend to show up in developing countries sooner than developed countries, but eventually it would spread around the world. So this is concerning, but by all means it's not a prediction of the end of the world. And I don't want to fall into that trap. A lot of people, as they get older, they tend to think that the world is going downhill. The world is getting worse as they get closer to death. I don't want to fall into that trap, and I want to remain optimistic. It seems like the recent news hasn't allowed for a whole lot of optimism about the future, but yeah, necessity is the mother of invention. So maybe this struggle will be the push that causes us to form a new way of allocating resources that is more just and and more sustainable than the methods we're using right now. So yeah, the future could be bright indeed if we take the opportunity not to fight over dwindling resources, but to solve our problems through innovation. Okay, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. Thank you for watching American Teacher. Bye-bye.